Our guest on This is America and the World is Jason Rezaian. Mr. Rezaian is a staff writer at The Washington Post and was formerly the Washington Post bureau chief in Tehran. Mr. Rezaian is the author of the new book, Prisoner, which details his year-and-a-half in jail in Iran under the false charges of being a CIA station chief and spy. Jason, it's so terrific to sit and talk with you.
Thanks so much for having me on today, Dennis.
It's really an honor. It's really an honor for what you've been through. I mean, just amazing. But let's turn the clock back. Spring 2014. And one of the things you say in the book is, life was good.
Life was great. I mean, I was a foreign correspondent working for the Washington Post at a moment when the Post was really on the rise. The story of Iran was evolving in ways that it hadn't in the previous 35 years. There was negotiations going on between the U.S. and Iran for the first time in all that time. I was married to a beautiful young Iranian woman. We've been married for just over a year. And I had no complaints, none whatsoever.
None whatsoever. July comes along, what happens?
Lots of complaints. You know, the negotiations between Iran and Western powers over the nuclear capacity of Iran were in full swing at that point. John Kerry and other Western foreign ministers were meeting with Iran's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, on a very regular basis. It looked as though the deal, if not a foregone conclusion, was something that was likely to happen in the months ahead. Again, I was doing my job of covering the story of Iran for a very general American audience. And then one day, one night on July 22nd of that year, my wife and I were getting ready to go to a birthday party for my mother-in-law. We were also planning on heading to the United States.
Bags were packed?
Bags were packed. 3 days later, we were going to come to the States for about 2 months to get her green card. We were headed to this birthday party. We'll leave our apartment. The elevator door opens up into our garage, and there's a man standing with a gun pointed right at me. They forced their way back into the elevator, along with several other agents of an undetermined security force within the Iranian regime. Took us back up to our apartment, separated the two of us, ransacked the place, took our identity cards, our passports, our money, computers, cell phones, passwords, everything, and then hauled us off to Evin prison, the notorious political prison in the north of Tehran, which happened to be just a couple miles away from home. When
I say 62, what does that do?
Well, you know, I say, you talking to me?
Yeah.
Because that's my prison number. You know, the number 62 tells you that in that section of the prison, I was the 31st male inmate of that year. Odd numbers reserved for female detainees and even ones for males. So it gives you a sense about how unique that part of the prison is. It's specifically designed to hold people who I call hostages. Usually they're foreign nationals, dual nationals like myself, or people that are charged with some other type of national security crime. But by and large, what we find out is usually these are innocent folks doing a good job of something that end up, you know, crossing some imaginary line with the Revolutionary Guard.
So you and your wife both arrested, both put into prison.
Yep.
What were the charges? What was the evidence? What were the potential penalties?
The charges, as I understand them, I mean, it took many months for them to actually make a charge against me, was that, that I was working as a spy for the U.S. government under the guise of being a journalist. For the Washington Post. That's important because I'd been working in Iran for 5 years as a journalist with state permission. Literally, the day that we were arrested, both my wife and I had our permission to do journalism extended for an entire year.
She was working for Bloomberg.
From Bloomberg, and then later for the national newspaper in Abu Dhabi. You know, they do very serious background checks on anybody who's working for foreign media in that country. So it would have been almost impossible for us to be what they said we were. They also said that I had made various damaging threats to Iran's national security, that I was producing anti-regime propaganda, the sort of thing that authoritarian regimes have been doing for decades, if not a couple of centuries.
So, solitary for a long while.
Yes.
Interrogations on a daily basis, sometimes.
For months. Yeah, sometimes many hours a day. And that went on from July of 2014, really from when we were first arrested up until probably January or February of 2015, which is when they started moving this evidence and testimony to a courtroom session. I was taken to court several times in the early part of 2015 and then put on trial in the summer of 2015. You asked about the possible ramifications. I mean, some of these crimes, if you will, carry the death penalty.
Sure.
There was a lot of speculation by the U.S. government that if I was convicted, I would be sentenced to at least life in prison. So,
and in the book you also mentioned execution.
And execution. I mean, they threatened.
Beheading.
They threatened to behead me, from the earliest days, and that continued on for many months.
So early on, Jason, you kind of think of it as, oh, this is a big mistake. And you had at least a personality that allowed you to kind of accept and challenge continually.
Look, I am somebody who has made a life of getting along with people and figuring out what it takes to get along with other people, including the authorities within the Islamic Republic. I wouldn't have been working there with that kind of permission as I had for so many years. So right off the bat, I thought to myself, this is a mistake that will get solved. There will be somebody within the system that comes along and talks some sense into these guys. The negotiations between Iran and the West, specifically the United States, had gone to such a point that it would be very difficult for them to pull back at that moment. And it would also look very bad from the American side to have a Washington Post correspondent sitting in jail for a very long time. So I thought I had things working in my favor. I still sat there for a year and a half.
Hold on that note.
Yeah.
Here's the book, just simply called Prisoner. 544 days in an Iranian prison. Solitary confinement, sham trial, high-stakes diplomacy, and the extraordinary efforts it took to get Jason out. It is a wonderful, wonderful book. Now he's with the Washington Post as a columnist. Jason Rezaian. Obama had trouble pronouncing your name, right? Rezaian.
Yeah, he said it many different ways.
Yeah, but got you out.
Yeah.
Take a little break. Back on the other side. This is America and the World. This is America and the World is brought to you by Japan. History, hospitality, and advanced technology, sharing tomorrow. The Republic of Haiti. The League of Arab States. The Sultanate of Oman. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Forerunner Foundation, dedicated to forward-thinking public policy. And the Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. Jason, it's easy to say a year and a half, but a year and a half in jail, in prison. You don't know what's going on the outside.
Very little.
And they're lying to you on the inside. From a personal point of view, and beautifully written.
Thank you.
What does it do to a person mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually?
I think mentally, it challenges your brain and your understanding of reality. Solitary confinement is designed to do just that, to really separate you from reality. They put you in a very confined space. They take away all sorts of sensory stimulation, information, human contact, and you become very malleable. You become, as I describe it, almost like a caged animal, right? On a physical level, during that period of solitary confinement, I was in there for 49 days. I lost 40 pounds. And, you know, looking at me before and now, you might say to yourself, well, the guy could stand to lose a few pounds. But that's not the way you want to do it.
You don't want to be on the Iranian diet.
No, not on the Iranian regime diet, no. Spiritually, I think you run the risk of losing hope and losing trust in humanity. But, you know, the response that I've had from people here in the United States since returning home has gone a long way to win back some of that trust and faith in humanity that I'd lost.
But that hope word, did you ever lose hope?
I came close. I think, you know, in the early days of solitary, you are too confused and too sure that this is going to end to lose all hope. But then the time just drags on, and you get to a point where you wonder if you're ever going to have a conversation with anybody you know ever again. So to come out of that experience into a slightly better set of circumstances with a cellmate and, you know, periodic, very short visits with my wife, it gave me a shot of hope each time. And I savored those little morsels of hope and learned to live off of those.
She got out at a particular point. Why did they release her?
I think that it was...
She is Iranian.
She's Iranian.
You're Iranian American, right?
She was born and raised there to Iranian parents. Lived her whole life there until our release. I was born here to an Iranian father and American mother.
California.
San Francisco Bay Area, born and raised. But you know, they released her, one, because she hadn't done anything wrong. Two, you know, there was no particular leverage that they could extract from the United States of America by holding her hostage. So they let her go under some conditions. She wasn't allowed to talk to the media. She had to move back in with her parents. Basically, you know, it's a fairly patriarchal and in many ways misogynistic power structure. And the assumption is that a young woman is not going to be able to cause any real problems on her own. Fortunately for me, I have a very determined wife who's very intelligent, capable, and tough. And she became, on the ground, the most incredible advocate anybody could ever want.
Two others jump out at me. Many people on the outside were working on your behalf. But your mother moved.
So, you know, after she moved to Iran, you know, she'd spent a lot of time in Iran over the years by virtue of her marriage to my dad. She had an Iranian citizenship, and she used it. She came and really planted herself in Tehran. We understood that when she was in town, things happened. And they couldn't make a prohibition on her talking to the U.S. or international media. And the last thing that they were probably going to do was hurt her, an older woman in her mid-70s. But that didn't stop them from threatening her, you know? Very, very passive-aggressively, some people would say aggressively. So, Mrs. Rezaian, you're welcome in this country. It's your country. You're a citizen here. But we can't guarantee your safety. You might die in a car accident tomorrow. You know, I mean, this is the way that they work on people.
And early in the game, they told you that the word was out that you had died in a car accident.
Well, and that's plausible because Iran has one of the highest you know, road death rates in the world. And I thought to myself, well, maybe that's what they're telling people. A very scary situation.
Your mother's there, your wife is there, they're working on your behalf, but God bless your brother.
Incredible.
Ali.
Ali, yeah. I mean, I have spoken to various people that were in the Obama administration, people at the Washington Post, at the law firm that the Post had hired on our behalf, people in Congress, and almost to a person, they say, we've never seen such an effective advocate for a family member as your big brother. He understood how to talk to the media, and I don't think he understood how to do that on day one. I mean, you know, this is not something that he was born to do,
Yeah.
right? He learned very quickly on the fly. And then also how to work with the folks in government to get what it was he needed out of those situations. So, you know, while other families might have said, why aren't you telling us what you're doing to bring our loved one home? He would say, you know, you tell me you're doing things to bring my brother home, I'll take that at face value. I'm going to continue to advocate in these other more public ways. And I think it was an incredible balancing act. Ultimately, there are a lot of other people held around the world and also in Iran. These days they come to us, they look at us as the success story, but it still took 1.5 years, as you say.
So you got brother, mother, wife, U.S. government, Washington Post,
Yep.
Secretary Kerry,
Yeah,
celebrities,
yeah.
Muhammad Ali,
Anthony Bourdain.
Bourdain.
Yeah, I mean, all of these people signing up to say, this guy is a journalist, and you know, you shouldn't be jailing innocent journalists. Whatever your reasoning is, it's a bad look.
But the idea that you were the CIA, you know, station chief,
Right.
And a spy, they slanted the idea of your reporting in a way that you were hostile to the regime and you were undercutting.
I was undercutting the regime by trying to pave the way for better relations with the United States of America. And, you know, having experienced these people, you know, before my imprisonment, but also hearing them rationalize these arguments while I sat there, I understood that their greatest fear is that they lose control of this society, and they lose control of the society. And I think that's happening.
They were worried that U.S. businesses and U.S. interests were going to come into the country and they would be in disfavor and the West would be.
I think that's part of it. I think it's also, you know, a fear of cultural invasion as well. I mean, I think it's a kind of across the board sort of thing. And ultimately, you look at a country like Iran as the Islamic Republic, and you look at a country like America, and in no way can Iran compete with what we have here.
Tell me a couple of things that we should know about the Iranian culture.
Well, first and foremost, you know, I think it's pretty well established that it's one of the oldest continually intact cultures in the world. It goes back thousands of years, and it has very rich and ingrained rituals and ideas and traditions, and it's a very hospitable culture. It's a culture that highly puts a high value on education and hospitality and learning from other societies. So it's not been natural for Iranians to be cut off from the rest of the world in the ways that they have been for much of the past 40 years. But it's still a wonderful place, a wonderful people. You know, I read travel magazines and always have over the past few years. Before I was imprisoned and since I've been released, I see magazines saying, you know, this is a wonderful place to visit. While I agree that there's a lot of great things to see and do and experience in Iran, unfortunately, they haven't done what they need to guarantee people's safety if they come. So I can't tell you to go and visit it, but I can tell you from my own experience of living there and traveling there, I enjoyed much of my life living in that country.
Do you realize, and do you own the fact that you have a lot of courage to have gone through what you've gone through? Do you own it?
No. I mean, I own the fact that I survived something very difficult that most people don't think that they could survive. But I'm here to say that, you know, you get thrust in these very difficult situations and you find a reservoir of strength and courage and survival skills to get through it. I tell people when they ask me, you know, you have such a good attitude and you're very happy and, you know, you're so hopeful. And I tell them, I said, I didn't have a choice. Now that I think about it, I realize I did have a choice. But if I chose the other choice, if I chose to be hopeless and angry and bitter, then I'd lose. You know, I feel like I've come out of this situation a stronger person, a more experienced person, Of course, I would like to have the year and a half that's been stolen from my wife and me back. I'd also like my wife to be able to feel like she could connect with her homeland, her family and friends who are still in Iran, and she's been blocked from doing that. We have plenty of things to be angry about, but we have even more things to rejoice in. That's what I think.
So what would you say is the single most important lesson?
Well, I think there's a couple of lessons. One, if you are hawkish on Iran and our policy towards Iran, you should readjust that thinking a little bit, because it's a country filled with people who has been suffering at the hands of not only their own authorities in that country, but also U.S. policy for many years. If you are inclined to look at Iran as a country and as a system that deserves more sympathy and support, because it stood up against Iran, I'd like you to check that as well, because they do horrible things to their own people and to visiting people. And more than that, I'd like you to walk away knowing how much I love my wife.
You're wearing a pin.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can go in very close on the pin. Free Austin
Tice.
Tice. Tell me about Austin Tice.
Austin Tice is a freelance journalist who was kidnapped in 2012 in Syria. He was writing for the Washington Post and other news organizations. He's been missing all this time. We believe that he's alive, and I think that the belief is that he's being held by forces close to the Syrian President Assad, but not the actual regime, and that more should be done to bring him home. I think if you saw the Super Bowl ad that the Washington Post ran, Austin was one of the people that was featured in there. We have an opportunity to bring him home in the way that we can't bring Marie Colvin or Jamal Khashoggi home. And so I would urge everybody paying attention to do all that they can to support this effort to bring him back.
When you read a story like that which happened to Khashoggi, what goes through you?
Well, I mean, in that particular instance, we were writing for the same section of the Washington Post. I met Jamal several times. We were on the cusp of a friendship, I would say. You know, we had a lot of things in common. We'd both been working in countries that we held very dear and were thrown out of those countries in different ways. Saudi Arabia and Iran have a lot of problems with each other, and he didn't see eye to eye with me about Iran, and I didn't see eye to eye with him about Saudi Arabia. But at the same time, we both respected and demanded the right for people in those countries to express themselves and work towards better lives. So when Jamal was disappeared, and later it became clear that it was murdered, it was a huge shock to me, to my wife. We had spent time with Jamal, over the summer of 2018, had a lovely dinner with he and one of his daughters. But ultimately, as the weeks and months passed, the way that I saw the Washington Post spring into action, demanding justice, for me personally, who was on the other side of one of those situations not too long ago, and the Post did all of those same things for me, it was very heartwarming to know that I'm a part of an organization that cares for not only for its people, but for the ideals that a free press needs.
So it was July of 2014, year and a half. So the release date and your coming home date was
January 17th of 2016. A lot of people think it was January 16th because that's the day that the deal was implemented between Iran and world powers.
You were a hostage.
100%.
And you were a chip. You were a bargaining chip.
Yeah, there's no way
around it. A huge deal.
I was one of many pieces in a very large deal.
And two other Americans
were released with me and came out with me. There was also a couple of other Americans who were released on that day, but didn't leave with us. And in exchange, 7 Iranians imprisoned in America were also released.
Who didn't choose to want to go home.
Every last one of them stayed. I mean, what would you do?
Yeah. And a little cash as well.
Well, the cash was a separate deal that happened to be culminated on that day.
What a wonderful writer you are.
Well,
humor, severity, the tragedy of it all, the courage that you have, and it's a book that is incredibly accessible to everyone, and it's just a thrill to sit and chat with you.
my pleasure. Thank you, Dennis.
Welcome home.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. For information about This Is America and the World, visit our website, thisisamerica.net, or our YouTube channel, This Is America TV, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. You can listen to all of our ambassador interviews on our podcast, The Ambassador Series. It's available on our website and iTunes. This Is America and the World is brought to you by the Republic of Haiti, the League of Arab States, the Sultanate of Oman, the Rotondaro Family Trust, the Forerunner Foundation, dedicated to forward-thinking public policy, and the Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings.